Kilcorsie, the unsolved murder of Father Niall Molloy. On the evening of Sunday, the 7th of July, 1985, three good friends, Richard Flynn, his wife Teresa, and Father Niall Molloy shared drinks together in the master bedroom of the Flynn's home, Kilcorsie House, just outside Clara, County Offaly. Before sunrise the following morning, Father Niall Molloy would lie dead. The culprit made a full admission. However, the Molloy family's 40-year search for truth and justice had only just begun. In this episode, the highly anticipated trial of Richard Flynn gets underway in the Circuit Criminal Court in Dublin. The Molloys hope to finally understand how and why Father Niall met his tragic end. However, the prosecution's case begins to falter when Richard's defense team cross-examines the state pathologist. Episode 3: The Trial of Richard Flynn. When Richard Flynn was preparing to stand trial for manslaughter and assault, the same coalition government of Fine Gael and the Labour Party had now been in power for nearly 4 years. Garret FitzGerald was still Taoiseach. However, in February of 1986, around the time Richard opted for trial in Dublin, the Taoiseach performed a cabinet reshuffle. He would appoint Alan Dukes as the new Minister for Justice, and the old Minister for Justice, Michael Noonan, would be demoted to Minister for Industry and Commerce. Frank Rowe was born in Dublin in 1920 and lived near Dundalk in County Louth. His grandfather established the local newspaper, the Dundalk Democrat, and as of the 1980s, the Rowe family still held control of the publication. His father, who was once a solicitor, eventually went on to become a circuit court judge. Coming from a staunch Fine Gael family, Frank Rowe's father represented Fine Gael in County Louth in the 1938 general election, but failed to get elected. Frank Rowe attended UCD in the 1930s and was called to the bar in 1942. Like his father before him, Frank would run as a Fine Gael candidate in County Louth in the 1948 and 1951 general elections, but he too failed to be elected. He would remain active in Fine Gael politics throughout his legal career, but would not stand again for election. Frank would eventually go on to become a circuit court judge in 1973, and in February 1986, a few months before the trial of Richard Flynn, he became president of the circuit court. As well as being active in politics, Justice Frank Rowe also had a passion for horses and was considered a member of the horsey set. He was an amateur jockey. In the 1950s, he even won the Ulster Grand National, riding his own horse, Mr. Old Scotia. An avid rider, he took part in point-to-point racing. He especially loved to follow flat racing and, as a rule, would never sit to hear cases during the Cheltenham Festival. His brother was also a professional jockey. Justice Rowe owned many racehorses. His most successful horse, Carlingford Castle, came second in the Epsom Derby. He was also a keen huntsman and was a member of the National Hunt Steeplechase Committee since 1974. Father Niall became chef d'equipe for the National Hunt in 1975. When the case of the Director of Public Prosecutions versus Richard Carney Flynn was presented at the call-out stage, the newly appointed president of the Circuit Court, Justice Rowe, chose to hear the case. The DPP appointed Raymond Groarke, barrister at law, to prosecute the Flynn case on behalf of the state when it was scheduled to be heard in Tullamore. Mr. Groarke was born in 1952 and was called to the bar in 1973. He practiced as a barrister mainly in the Midlands Court Circuit before being appointed as the prosecution barrister in the Flynn case. Based in Athlone, Mr. Groarke was retained to prosecute the case when it was transferred to the Circuit Criminal Court in Dublin. In 1996, Mr. Groarke became a Circuit Court judge, and in 2012, Justice Groarke would also go on to become president of the Circuit Court. He served as a judge until his retirement in January 2022. Mr. Patrick McEntee, Senior Counsel, was Ireland's most renowned criminal defence barrister. Born in Monaghan in 1938, he came to prominence during the 1970s as a criminal defender in the Special Criminal Courts, which were established in 1972, primarily to tackle paramilitary activities. In 1982, Mr. McEntee defended Malcolm MacArthur in his infamous murder case. MacArthur killed Bridie Gargan, an off-duty nurse, while she was sunbathing in the Phoenix Park, Dublin, just to steal her car. MacArthur then went on to murder Donald Dunn, a young farmer from County Offaly, with the shotgun Donald had advertised for sale. After committing the murders, MacArthur was apprehended in the Attorney General's luxury apartment in Dalkey, potentially making the Attorney General an accessory after the fact. The Gardaí would later decide that the Attorney General was an innocent participant, but that didn't prevent him from losing his job as a result of the debacle. Mr. McEntee did a deal with the DPP, which was unheard of at the time. Plea bargaining and deals were not common practice in Irish law. The deal with the DPP involved MacArthur pleading guilty, but to only one of the two murders. Bridie Gargan's family would get justice. Donald Dunn's would not. Mr. McEntee was a master orator and an entertaining dramatist in the courtroom. His arguments and speeches were known to carry great sway with juries. He not only had charisma, but also had a thorough command of case law and how to apply it to his client's advantage. Eventually, Mr. McEntee would go on to become chairman of the Irish Bar Council. Paddy McEntee, Senior Counsel, was the most prominent criminal defence barrister in Ireland and the best that money could buy. By the time he would come to defend Richard Flynn, his fee to defend a private case could cost up to £1,000 a day. So how Richard could afford to retain Mr. McEntee's services is unknown. The transcript of Richard Flynn's trial was released into the public domain in 2022 after much campaigning by Father Niall's family. Excerpts from the transcript are used to recreate the courtroom exchanges in this episode. On the 12th of June 1986, the Director of Public Prosecutions brought its case against Mr. Richard Carney Flynn in the Dublin Circuit Criminal Court. He stood accused on 2 counts: manslaughter contrary to common law and assault occasioning actual bodily harm. The trial was highly anticipated and would generate a media frenzy outside the court. The members of Father Niall's family and his devoted parishioners from Castlecoot were in attendance in the gallery. Father Niall's nephew, Bill Maher, met Dennis and Marie Hochter in the court, and they explained to Bill that they had been subpoenaed to provide witness testimony and to set aside 2 or 3 days to wait until called to give evidence. The accused, Richard Carney Flynn, was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to counts 1 and 2 on the indictment. Mr. Groarke, barrister at law, appeared for the prosecution. Mr. P. McEntee, Senior Counsel, and Mr. James Connolly, barrister at law, appeared for the accused. Teresa Flynn did not attend the opening day of Richard's trial. In fact, she would not be called to give evidence. Under Irish law, she could not be compelled to testify against her husband. Counsel for the prosecution, Mr. Raymond Groarke, opened proceedings by calling the state's first witness, Detective Garda Michael Campbell, of the mapping section of the Gardaí, based in Harcourt Street, Dublin. The jury was provided with their first exhibit, a booklet of 3 maps prepared by Detective Garda Campbell after he attended the murder scene on the 8th of July 1985. The first map in the booklet was a portion of the Ordnance Survey map of Clara, showing the location of Kilcorsie House in the townland of Kilcorsie. The second map was of the ground floor plan of Kilcorsie House, detailing the entrances and ground floor rooms. It also showed the location of the telephone in a pantry adjacent to the kitchen. The last map was of the first floor of Kilcorsie House. This map had items and locations labelled on it using letters of the alphabet. Detective Garda Campbell also noted the outline of the body and the 8-foot, 5-inch long bloody drag mark on his map. Under questioning, he gave very brief evidence of what he observed in the master bedroom, the ensuite bathroom, and Father Niall's bedroom during his examination. He also noticed a smudge of blood on the newel post at the top of the stairs on the landing of the first floor. Detective Garda Campbell finished his testimony by confirming the locations of certain rooms and their proximity to other rooms upstairs in Kilcorsie House. He was not cross-examined by the defence. Mr. McEntee had no questions, my lord. Detective Garda Anthony Byrne was the next witness to be sworn in. He confirmed he was an official photographer attached to the photographic section of the Garda Technical Bureau in Dublin. He was also dispatched to Kilcorsie House on the 8th of July 1985. The second exhibit provided to the jury was a book of 11 photographs Detective Garda Byrne had taken at the scene. Ranging from the exterior of Kilcorsie House to the drag mark in blood on the master bedroom carpet, the photos were indexed, numbered 1 to 11, with their descriptions at the back of the book. Under questioning by Mr. Groarke, Detective Garda Byrne was asked to describe what they were looking at in each photograph. Most of the photographs showed paper arrows pointing at the bloodstains at the scene. Once he detailed all 11 of the photographs, Mr. Groarke finished his examination of the witness. As with Detective Campbell of the mapping department, Detective Garda Byrne was not cross-examined by the defence either. Mr. McEntee had no questions, my lord. The next witness to be called by the prosecution to give evidence was Douglas Goodbody. Once he was sworn in, Mr. Goodbody was questioned about his background and his 15-year friendship with both the Flynns and Father Malloy. He described them all as good friends, frequent visitors to each other's houses, and that they all had a mutual interest in horses. The questions from Mr. Groarke then turned to the weekend of Maureen Flynn and Ralph Park's wedding. Mr. Goodbody confirmed that he was invited but did not attend the wedding on the 6th of July 1985, but that he did attend Kilcorsie House on the Sunday for lunch in the Marquee. He stated that he arrived for lunch at approximately 1 p.m. and there were about 20 other guests in attendance at that stage. He thought Father Niall arrived at around 2 p.m. Mr. Goodbody confirmed he spoke with Father Niall that afternoon, and when asked what type of humour did he appear to be in, he described Father Niall as being in good humour. Mr. Goodbody explained that when he was leaving Kilcorsie House shortly after 3 p.m, he invited Richard, Teresa, and Father Niall over to his house later that evening so they could fill him in on the details of the wedding the day before. According to Mr. Goodbody, Richard, Teresa, and Father Niall arrived at his house at around 7:30 p.m. Once again, he was asked what kind of humour Father Niall appeared to be in. He stated that Father Niall was in good humour despite suffering from a severe bout of hay fever. During the visit, they each had 3 drinks. Before they left, Mr. Goodbody brought them to the stables to show them his horses. He testified that the Flynns and Father Nile left his house at approximately 9:20 p.m. and they were all in very good humour and very friendly. This time, Paddy McEntee did take the opportunity to cross-examine the witness on behalf of the defence. He asked, "The position, Mr. Goodbody, is it not, that Mr. and Mrs. Flynn were neighbours and friends of yours?" "Correct. And had been for 15 years. "Yes. Pleasant, hard-working people with a very nice family, and people that you had no hesitation in having together into your house?" "Absolutely none." "And you visited them from time to time?" "Yes." "And because of your friendship with the Flynns, you came to know Father Malloy, who was a friend of the Flynns, and again you had a friendship with him because of his interest in horses?" "That is correct." "And all the people with whom we are concerned with in this case are highly respectable, reputable, decent people, and all friends of yours and friends of each other?" "That is my opinion." "And that was the position. Everybody was perfectly courteous and friendly, and you had no hesitation. Indeed, you enjoyed having their company and showing them your horse and giving them these 3 drinks that you gave them?" "That is correct, my lord." "And when they left you, Father Malloy and Mr. and Mrs. Flynn were clearly on good terms and enjoying one and another's company considerably?" "Yes, my lord." Mr. McEntee's strategy was not to cross-examine the witness exactly, but to select and reaffirm the positive aspects of their friendship, which looked favourable to the accused and portrayed his good character. The next witness listed to give evidence was an employee of the Flynns, James Lowry. James recounted his version of events from the weekend of the wedding nearly a year ago. He attended the wedding and while at the wedding spoke with Father Nile. The following day he went to the match in Tullamore. When he returned to Kilcorsey at around 7 p.m, he met Father Nile briefly. When asked what kind of form did Father Nile appear to be in, James answered, "In good form." Mr. Groark also asked James who else was in the house at this time, and James answered, "Mrs. Flynn was there. I didn't meet anyone else." Mr. Groark then asked, "At 9 o'clock or thereabouts you returned to Kilcorsey House again?" "Yes." "Did you meet Mrs. Flynn?" "Yes, I did." "I think she was going to get a cup of tea for herself." "Yes." "And there was nothing unusual in any way about her?" "No." James left Kilcorsey for a night out at 9:30 p.m. When he returned to Kilcorsey for the last time at 3 a.m, he let himself in with his own key. When Mr. Groark posed the question, and there was a general state of excitement in the house at that time, James agreed. He explained that he initially met the younger guests. This is when he was told Father Nile was dead. When he went to the kitchen about 15 minutes later, he met Father Duignan. He made a cup of tea or coffee and stayed in the kitchen for a while, and then at around 4 a.m. he went outside. At around 6:30 a.m., when he came back, there was a Garda stationed in the hallway. Again, Mr. McEntee had no questions, my lord. Maureen Parks, née Flynn, was the next witness called to testify. She began by confirming she was the daughter of the accused, Richard Flynn. Maureen was then asked to confirm the events of the wedding weekend, the marriage in the church in Clara, the reception afterwards at her parents' house, and the lunch for the remaining guests on the Sunday. Mr. Groark began his questioning. "Miss Parks, about what time did you go there?"
"We arrived about 12:30, between 12 and 12:30.
"I think there were drinks served first to the guests, and then lunch was served at about 3 o'clock.
"That's right."
Did you see Father Malloy there when you arrived?
No, he hadn't arrived when we arrived.
Did you see him arriving, or do you know what time he did arrive?
I couldn't say exactly what time he arrived. I know he was there by 2 o'clock.
Maureen confirmed after the lunch guests left, her parents left to visit the Goodbodies at around 7 o'clock, while she remained in Kilcorsi with her sister-in-law Anne to mind the house. There was no mention of them staying back to keep Auntie May company. She repeated the same testimony as was in her prepared statement for the Gardaí. Her parents and Father Malloy returned from the Goodbodies at around 9:45 p.m. All were in good form, in good spirits, and then Maureen and Anne left to join the others in the pub. Mr. Groarke continued his questioning. Miss Parks, I think you remained on there until after closing time, and you went then to your brother David's house.
That is correct.
At Tubber?
That is correct.
What time do you think you left the pub?
I think it was possibly around midnight.
Maureen described how they left the pub directly for David's house, and they arrived there shortly after midnight. They all had coffee and sandwiches and then left David's house to return to Kilcorsi at around 1 o'clock in the morning. On their return to Kilcorsi, her father Richard met her. Mr. Groarke then asked, Miss Parks, who was there when you arrived home? Who was in the house?
My father.
And did he meet you?
My father met me, yes. And my mother was in the house.
As a result of what he told you, you went upstairs?
I went directly upstairs.
Maureen went on to describe finding Father Nile lying on the floor of the bedroom and her mother was on her knees beside his body. She explained she tried to find a pulse but couldn't find one, so she proceeded to look after her mother, who was very upset. She recounted Dr. O'Sullivan arriving at possibly 2:30 a.m., but she couldn't be sure. She agreed that Dr. O'Sullivan treated and took over the care of her mother and that he drove her and her mother to Tullamore Hospital. Maureen confirmed that she stayed a while with her mother while she was being admitted, and by the time she arrived back at Kilcorsi, the Gardaí were there. Mr. McEntee rose to his feet. He began his cross-examination of Maureen. Miss Parks, I think the situation is that Father Malloy was a close family friend of all your family, father, mother, and the children.
Absolutely.
And a frequent visitor to your house.
Yes.
And he shared an interest with your household in horses.
That is correct.
Mr. McEntee then walked Maureen through the events of the wedding weekend, how Father Nile couldn't celebrate their wedding mass as he had other commitments, but he arrived for the speeches. Miss Parks, he arrived at the festivities and then I think he went back to his parish to say Mass on the Sunday morning.
I do remember him saying goodbye, but I can't remember.
Well, it was a great day in your life. You can't be expected to remember everything. In any event, he was there. He took part in the festivities. He went back to his parish to say Mass on Sunday morning, and then he came back to his fork lunch, and then afterwards spent the day with your parents.
Yes.
And that was all very pleasant, and everyone was enjoying the second day of the festivities consequent on your marriage.
Yes.
And that was all very happy and pleasant.
Wonderful.
A wonderful marriage, and everyone was delighted with themselves and with you and your new husband.
Yes.
And then you went off with the young people after your parents had come back from their visit to the Goodbodies, and in due course you came back to find your father in a state of extreme distress.
That is correct.
And clearly distraught. Would that be a fair word to describe his condition?
It would, yes.
You went upstairs then and found your mother trying to resuscitate the late Father Malloy.
Yes.
And you, being a trained nurse, tried to help in that process, and also tried to help your mother, who was in a very distressed condition.
Yes.
And in due course, your mother was taken off to hospital after Dr. O'Sullivan had sedated her.
That is correct.
And you then, I think, did what you could to render assistance to your father. He was distressed, and indeed the entire household, who were in an advanced state of distress about this.
Correct.
Appalling occurrence.
That is correct.
No further questions, my lord. Father James Duignan was the next witness to be called by the prosecution. He confirmed he was the parish priest of Clara and knew the Flynn family since he took over the parish in 1980. He testified to receiving a phone call from Richard Flynn at around 1 o'clock in the morning on the 8th of July, 1985. Father Duignan explained Richard invited him to come to his house as quickly as he could and to be prepared to anoint a person. He claimed to have arrived at Kilcorsi within 5 minutes of getting the call. He described being shown to an upstairs room and seeing a man lying on his back, a man who he didn't know, but to whom he proceeded to administer the last rites. Mr. Groark continued his questioning. Father Duignan, can you say was he alive or dead at that time? I wasn't sure whether he was alive or dead. You administered the last rites and went downstairs, and I think you assisted Mr. Flynn in telephoning a doctor. That's correct. Who did you try to ring? Dr. O'Sullivan. And where does he practice? In Kilbeggan. Were you successful? We were not successful at that moment, and I asked Mr. Flynn if we could try some other numbers of other doctors, and he got me the phone book. Oh, I had forgotten to bring my glasses with me, and this necessitated me going back to the parochial house to get my glasses. At the time you left the Flynn house to go to get your glasses, who was in the Flynn house? The only ones I was aware of were Richard Flynn, Mrs. Flynn, and the deceased. How long were you away? I would say I was back again. It's only a quarter of a mile from the parochial house to the Flynn household. I would say I was back again within 5 minutes. Father Duignan explained that on his return to Kilcorsi, the younger guests were at the door, and he brushed past them to contact a doctor as quickly as possible. They tried Dr. O'Sullivan again unsuccessfully, and then Zandra suggested that it was possible Dr. O'Sullivan could be at home, so Father Duignan volunteered to go with her to Kilbeggan. When they got there, they managed to alert Dr. O'Sullivan. Father Duignan was then cross-examined by Mr. McEntee. He asked Father Duignan to confirm he was roused by Richard Flynn calling him by phone that night, and that he was asked to bring the holy oils to anoint someone. Father Duignan agreed. He was shown to the bedroom where Father Niall lay by a distressed Richard Flynn. This time Mr. McEntee focused his questions on the efforts Father Duignan made to help contact a doctor as quickly as possible. And Father Duignan, partly through your own desire and partly through Mr. Flynn's prompting you, you tried to get a doctor. Correct. And you did everything you could, and Mr. Flynn did everything he could to rouse Dr. O'Sullivan, and then you rang a series of other doctors. Yes. And eventually, when you could get nobody, Zandra has come back with the young people. You drove off to Dr. O'Sullivan's and got him back. Yes. And the upshot of all of this is that Mr. Flynn got you to that house as quickly as ever he could, and got a doctor to that house as quickly as ever he could. I'm fully satisfied about that. Father Duignan had just testified under oath that he was satisfied that he assisted in getting medical help as quickly as possible, but the question was never put to him by the prosecution as to why no one had called an ambulance or at least gone to the nearby house of the local GP in Clara. The next witness called to give testimony was Dr. Dan O'Sullivan. He recalled Zandra Flynn and Father Duignan calling to his house at 10 to 2 in the morning of the 8th of July 1985. He couldn't hear their attempts to call him as he had the phone locked in the surgery. Mr. Groarke suggested that Dr. O'Sullivan went to Kilcorsie as a result of what Zandra and Father Duignan told him. Dr. O'Sullivan stated he arrived at Kilcorsie at around 2 a.m. and Zandra Flynn showed him up to the master bedroom. He saw and recognized Father Malloy as he knew him well. Dr. O'Sullivan examined Father Malloy and found that he was dead, so he focused his care on Teresa Flynn, who he described as being supported by her daughter and was quite hysterical. He confirmed treating and driving Teresa to Tullamore Hospital and having her admitted. Mr. Groarke then asked Dr. O'Sullivan could he say how long prior to him examining Father Malloy had he been dead. Dr. O'Sullivan stated, "He was still warm and there was no question of any rigor mortis having set, so I gather it was a relatively short time. That is all I can say. I think at 7:50 p.m. on the 15th of July that about a week later, at the request of the Gardaí, you took a blood sample from Richard Flynn and from Mrs. Teresa Flynn. That's right. And you gave those samples of blood to Detective Sergeant Dunn. That's correct." Mr. McEntee had just one question in cross-examination, but it was intended to highlight Richard and Teresa Flynn's willingness to help the Gardaí with their investigations. He asked, "And I think you got every cooperation from both Mr. Flynn and Mrs. Flynn in that matter?" "Oh, absolutely, absolutely," Dr. O'Sullivan replied. Sergeant Kevin Ford was the next witness to be sworn in. He confirmed that Father Duignan called to his house beside the Garda station in Clara at 3:15 a.m. on the morning of July 8, 1985. Sergeant Ford recounted setting off for Kilcorsie and notifying his superior, Detective Inspector Monaghan. He described the scene he saw on arrival, the body lying on the bedroom floor, and on lifting the orange towel from his face, noting the injuries Father Nile sustained. He confirmed he had not known Father Nile, but that Dr. O'Sullivan had explained who he was and his relationship to the Flynns. He described all the bloodstains he noticed in the bedroom, on the bedclothes, on pictures hanging on the wall above the body, and the bloody drag mark. Mr. Groarke continued to question Sergeant Ford. "I think you carried out your very quick examination of the room. You then left and spoke to Dr. O'Sullivan." "That is correct, my lord." "Were you then brought in to see Mr. Richard Flynn?" "Yes, his son David brought me into the room, and I saw Richard Flynn sitting on a sofa in the room. He was drinking a mug of coffee, and he asked me to have one. He appeared to be very relaxed, cool and calm. I think he apologized for bringing you out at that hour. Is that correct, Sergeant Ford?" "He did. That is correct, my lord." "I think he chatted a while about the wedding the previous day." "That is correct." "What did he say to you then, Sergeant Ford?" "He said it's a messy old business, indicating the body upstairs. I started to caution him that he wasn't obliged to say anything, but he waved his hand and told me that he understood all that. He told me that he felt sorry for his wife. I struck her with my left, and I hit him at least twice with my right, and that's all there is to it." Just then, Judge Rowe interjected. "He said he felt sorry for his wife." "That is correct, my lord." Mr. Groarke continued. "And after that, Sergeant Ford, I struck her with my left and I struck him at least twice with my right. That's all there is to it." "That is all there is to it," That's what he said to you, Sergeant Ford. That's what he said to me. I think David Flynn was present at the time. He was, yes. Sergeant Ford then went on to confirm that when Detective Inspector Monaghan arrived at around 4:25 a.m., he brought him upstairs and showed him the body. He also confirmed he introduced Detective Inspector Monaghan to Richard, and they all went into the sitting room. Mr. Groarke continued. What happened there, or what was said, Sergeant Ford? Well, on sitting down, Mr. Flynn said, I am the culprit. Sergeant Ford then relayed how Richard again apologized for the trouble he was causing in bringing them out so late. He confirmed hearing Detective Inspector Monaghan also caution Richard, and that Richard stated he understood the caution, but had to do it. Did Inspector Monaghan make some observation or question to Mr. Flynn? Oh, he did, yes, my lord. He asked Mr. Flynn did he find his wife and Father Malloy in a compromising situation, and Mr. Flynn replied, no, nothing like that. Did he continue? He then stated that Father Malloy was a friend of the family for about 28 years, and he went on to relate that himself and his wife were above in their bed at about 12 midnight. Father Malloy was also present, and they were having a drink. An argument developed about who would go downstairs to get another drink. When he, Mr. Flynn, refused to go down for the drink, both Father Malloy and his wife physically attacked him. He said he struck his wife once and Father Malloy at least twice. Sergeant Ford, did he say where he had struck his wife? On the face. Did he say what happened to her when he struck her? She fell. And Sergeant Ford, he struck Father Malloy twice. That is correct. Possibly 3 times? Possibly 3 times, my lord. Sergeant Ford, did he say what he used to strike Father Malloy? His fist, my lord. Did he say what part of Father Malloy he struck? His head and face. Sergeant Ford recounted how Richard told Detective Inspector Monaghan that he had then thrown water on both Teresa and Father Nile in an effort to revive them, as they were both unconscious. Richard then explained that he had contacted Father Dignan and tried to contact Dr. O'Sullivan, and when he got back upstairs, he found Father Nile was dead and Teresa was in a hysterical state. Mr. Groarke then got Sergeant Ford to confirm that Detective Inspector Monaghan was transcribing everything Richard said as he was saying it. When Detective Inspector Monaghan read it all back to him, Richard confirmed it was all correct, but when he was invited to sign the notes, Richard refused. He requested a photocopy of the notes he just declined to sign. Both Detective Inspector Monaghan and Sergeant Ford, as well as Sergeant Dunn, who also sat in on part of the interview, all signed the interview notes. The interview started at 4:45 a.m. and concluded at 5:05 that morning. Mr. McEntee remained in his seat. No questions, my lord. Sergeant Ford's superior at the time of the murder, Detective Inspector Thomas Monaghan, was the next witness to take the stand. Once he was sworn in, he confirmed he was stationed in Tullamore Garda Station at the time of the murder, and he received a phone call from Sergeant Ford at 3:35 a.m. on the morning of July 8, 1985. He reached Kilcorsey at around 4:25 a.m. that morning. Mr. Groarke began his questioning. Inspector Monaghan, you went upstairs with Sergeant Ford, and there you saw the body of a dead man lying face upwards. That is correct, inside the door of the master bedroom, my lord. How close to the door was it? It was quite close to the door. His left shoulder prevented the door from opening fully, my lord. His legs were parallel to the end wall of the room. He was dressed in a blue pullover, grey trousers, shoes, open neck shirt, my lord. His head was covered by a towel, Inspector Monaghan. That is right, a rusty-coloured towel over his face, my lord. You lifted the towel and saw the face of the dead man. That is correct, my lord. He had blood on his face and a cut on his upper lip and on the lower point of his jaw on the left-hand side, my lord. Inspector Monaghan, you also noticed that there was blood on the floor near the head. There was blood on the floor near the head and a large patch of blood similar to a drag mark between the body and the bed in the room, my lord, about 5 or 6 feet long and about 7 or 8 inches wide, my lord, on the white carpet. The body was fully dressed, Inspector Monaghan. Fully dressed, my lord. And there was a tweed jacket on the floor near the feet. That is correct, my lord. Detective Inspector Monaghan confirmed Sergeant Ford identified the deceased to him, and once he examined the scene, he was brought downstairs and introduced to Richard Flynn. He described that Richard was wearing a dressing gown, pajamas, and bedroom slippers when they were introduced. He confirmed he had not known Richard Flynn previously. Detective Inspector Monaghan also relayed the details of the notes of his interview with Richard that morning. His version of the interview with Richard was nearly identical to Sergeant Ford's, except Detective Inspector Monaghan made one addition. He said his wife came round, but he noticed that Father Malloy was breathing with difficulty and that he knew he had a heart condition. Detective Inspector Monaghan also confirmed he had taken notes of the interview as Richard was talking, and he read them back to Richard, who agreed it was a true account of what had happened. Richard declined to sign them, told him he would not sign anything at that time, but that he would make a full statement in the morning, and he requested a photocopy of the notes. Detective Inspector Monaghan went on to confirm that on the 15th of July, a week or so later, Mr. Lycett, Mr. Flynn's solicitor, called to Tullamore Garda Station and handed him a typewritten statement, signed by Mr. Flynn and witnessed by Mr. Lycett, which indicated that the notes he took at the interview on the morning of the 8th of July were correct and a true account of what had taken place in the bedroom. Mr. Groarke continued his questioning by returning to the day after the murder. I think later on that day at about 12 noon, you returned to the Flynn house. I did, my lord. And I think, Inspector Monaghan, you asked to see Mr. Flynn. At 12 noon, my lord. On the 8th? On the 8th, yes, I met Miss Anne Flynn, the accused daughter-in-law, and asked to speak with the accused. I was told he was in the rear lawn, my lord, and a short time later his legal adviser, Mr. Lycett, arrived as well. Mr. McEntee took exception to this line of questioning and raised an objection. There is no relevance to this material. Mr. Groarke gathered himself and continued. Through his solicitor, did you invite Mr. Flynn to make a written statement if he wished to do so? I did, my lord. And Mr. Lycett indicated that Mr. Flynn would not be making a statement. That is correct, my lord. Mr. McEntee did take the opportunity this time to cross-examine the witness. Based on what Detective Inspector Monaghan just testified to, there was a real fear the jury may begin to perceive the accused as being uncooperative with the Gardaí. This would conflict with the image of Richard the defence was trying to portray, that he was upfront, transparent, helpful, and cooperative. Mr. McEntee began his questioning by asking Detective Inspector Monaghan to clarify and agree that Richard had willingly given an account of what had happened, but he merely declined the offer to add to it. Mr. McEntee began, Would not more accurately be making another statement, Detective Inspector? That is correct, my lord. You already had a pretty comprehensive statement. I think there are minor variations. They are very minor. I think we had better get this accurately. The original note that you took, the relevant bit, was, quote, "About midnight last night, my wife and I went to bed. Father Malloy came into our bedroom, and we were all having a drink and a discussion. We all had quite an amount of drink taken. An argument developed between the three of us. It was a stupid argument over who would go downstairs to get another drink. I refused to get them a drink, and I said I was going to get one myself, and I was out of bed to go down. They both attacked me then, both my wife and Father Malloy, physically. My wife got out of bed, and Father Malloy, who was sitting in the room, got up to attack me. They both went for me at the same time, and I struck both of them with my fists. I hit my wife once on the face, and she fell down. I hit Father Malloy at least twice, and probably 3 times on the face with my clenched fist. Both my wife and Father Malloy were rendered unconscious. I examined my wife and saw that she was breathing. I also went to Father Malloy, and he was breathing with difficulty." There was a question from Mr. McEntee as to whether the notes taken at the interview mentioned Richard knew Father Malloy had a heart condition. Detective Inspector Monaghan explained it was mentioned later in the notes. Mr. McEntee continued, "I threw water on both their faces and said an act of contrition into Father Malloy's ear. My wife revived, but Father Malloy did not. He was having difficulty, and I knew he had a heart condition. I ran downstairs to phone the parish priest and Dr. O'Sullivan." And then he talks about the difficulty in making contact. Is that correct, Detective Inspector? That is correct, my lord. And isn't it correct to say that once you asked him what had happened, he gave you a completely frank account, which is the account that you embodied in your statement? That is correct. And there was no question of you having to put any pressure on or lean on him or even encourage him to talk? None whatever, my lord. He was perfectly frank, and he saw you were writing it out, and you wrote it down in his presence. And while he said he wouldn't sign it because he wanted to talk to his solicitor, he did tell you that in due course he would be making a full statement. That is correct, my lord. And he asked you for a copy of that, Detective Inspector. And presumably then he brought that to his solicitor, and his solicitor accepted that that was a fair and accurate statement that didn't need any enlargement. That is correct, my lord. When you, in due course, saw Mr. Flynn with his solicitor, he was saying to you what we talked about on the night of the 7th, morning of the 8th, that is all right. That is a true account of what transpired on the night of this tragedy. That is what is contained in Mr. Flynn's subsequent statement, handed in by his solicitor, my lord. So that you had, almost within hours of this tragedy, you had Mr. Flynn frankly and under caution telling you what happened, and you were writing it down, and then that being vouched for some days later. That is correct, my lord. The witness was then excused. The Malloy family in the public gallery couldn't take seriously the ridiculous story Richard Flynn claimed to be true. The mere suggestion that Father Nile would attack anyone was laughable. They thought the evidence, as presented so far, was preposterous. The speed at which the trial was going was unprecedented. Up until this point, it had taken only 90 minutes for the first 9 witnesses to give their evidence. This was part of the bigger plan being developed by Mr. McEntee and Richard's defense team. Mr. McEntee was deliberately declining his right to cross-examine most of the witnesses. The ones he did cross-examine was very brief. No cross-examination equals no elaboration. This legal maneuver would prove crucial to Mr. McEntee's overall strategy. The next witness listed to give evidence would be the last witness before court would adjourn for lunch. The prosecution called Father Noel's older brother, William Malloy, to take the stand. William maintained his composure as he answered the prosecution's questions about his brother, his being ordained as a priest, his lifelong interest in show jumping, and love of everything to do with horses. Once Mr. Groark had William paint a picture for the jury of the kind of man his brother was, he moved his questions on to when and how William heard of his brother's death. He asked, "I think on the 8th of July, 1985, after you heard about your brother's death, did you go to Clara Garda Station and from there to the Flynn residence in Kilcorsey House?" "I went straight to Clara Garda Station to find out what happened to my brother, because there was a knock at my door at about 8:30, and Father Cregan told me that my brother had had an accident. I thought it was merely a kick from a horse. When you got to Kilcorsey House, I think Richard Flynn came out to the driveway to meet you." "That's right. I first reported to Sergeant Fox." "And what did Richard Flynn say to you, Mr. Malloy?" "Richard Flynn said, 'I'm sorry. I'm sorry this had to happen.' I said, 'What did happen?' 'I believe this has gone on for 2 days. My brother just come up here as a friend, and I have come up. He is coming home to me. I have no longer a brother.' And what did Richard Flynn reply to you when you asked him what had happened?" "Sergeant asked me would I speak to Mr. Flynn inside in the house, so I said I would. And the inspector told me there was a Garda sitting in the hallway and he would show me the room where I could talk to Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn said again that he was terribly sorry for the whole thing, and I said, 'What happened?' And he said it was a political row. It started with a political row. Now there is one thing, Your Honour, that you might say." Judge Rowe quickly interjected, addressing Mr. Groark. "Mr. Groark," as if to say, "Get your witness in line." Mr. Groark duly complied. "Mr. Malloy, if you would answer the questions as I asked them, if you would." "Right." "Did you say to him, 'For God's sake, what happened? You have been friends for so long.'" "For so long." "Did he do something then?" "What Mr. Flynn did at the time. He was sitting on the couch on the right-hand side. I was sitting on the left, and he started scratching his face likewise. And I noticed under his fingernails of the right hand that all the blood was congealed, and there was swelling on the back of the right hand, and I said, 'Is that the hand that killed my brother?'" I think after this conversation took place, Mr. Flynn broke down and was very upset, and his daughter came in. Mr. Flynn was getting very upset as regards the hand. The next thing his daughter asked him to have some tea or coffee. I said no thanks, but Father may have some coffee that brought me up, and we had to return to Castlereagh. Garda Connolly was dead, and Father Cregan had to go down and receive the remains. I think you had a cup of tea or coffee and you left to go back home. That's right. Mr. McEntee knew he had to tread very carefully with the cross-examination of this witness. Because he was about to cross-examine the brother of the deceased, there was potential for exchanges to become emotionally charged. Mr. McEntee began his questioning. It is a fact, isn't it, that your late brother was a close family friend of Richard Flynn, Mrs. Flynn, and the Flynn family, for a very long time indeed? That is what Mr. Flynn told me. I never knew Mr. Flynn or the Flynn family in my life. Well, were you not aware there was a friendship between them? I was aware there was a friendship, But horsey people are horsey people. The Flynn family and I have never met. That is not what I'm putting to you, Mr. Malloy. I am putting it to you simply that you knew, I'm quoting from something you told the police, that you were aware of your late brother's friendship with the Flynn family from Clara. That would be true. And I'm saying that you knew that was a deep friendship that had lasted for a very long time. A very long time, and I could not understand what had gone wrong. What had gone wrong after 27 years. That is absolutely understandable. And I think when you got to Mr. Flynn's house, he came out of the house. He came across the driveway and he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry over Father Niall." That's right. And after some talk with the guards, you went into a private room. Yes, we were shown into a private room. And Richard said to you that he has a terrible lot of drink taken, that a political row started. And you said, for God's sake, what happened? You have been friends for so long. True. He didn't answer that question, but he showed you his hand. He held up his right hand and showed you black marks and discoloration of his fingers under the nails. Isn't that right? No, that is what apparently you told the guards, Mr. Malloy. He didn't answer me, but held up his right hand, showing black marks and discoloration of his fingers under the nails. No, Mr. Flynn by this time was getting nervous. We were talking about my brother. I said I came up for my brother, and he just did that once or twice. William gestured by rubbing his hands and scratching his face. McEntee continued. He became distressed. He became distressed. And what you told the guards was he didn't answer when you asked that question, and I quote, "He did not answer me, but held up his right hand, showing black marks and discoloration on his fingers under the nails." And he also said, after 20 years of friendship, why did it come to this? He broke down, began to cry, and became very distressed. At this stage, his daughter came in, and then the conversation about coffee occurred. Is that correct? The coffee arrived, and the daughter. You agree that that is what you told the police at the time, Mr. Malloy? I agree with that, and I signed it in Tullamore. And it was the truth. It was the truth. William stepped down from the witness stand, and the court adjourned for lunch. When the court reconvened after lunch, the prosecution's case continued. Mr. Groarke's next witness would be the most important one, and would be the first witness called to give evidence who was an expert in their field. This witness would spend the most time on the stand out of all the witnesses. Dr. John Harbison became the first state pathologist of Ireland in 1974. Educated in Trinity College Dublin, he had a distinguished career in medicine and as a forensic pathologist. He would return to his alma mater, Trinity College, and lecture there in medical jurisprudence, or legal medicine as it is also known. Part of his course would have included lecturing his students on how to deliver medical evidence in a legal setting. Dr. Harbison was no stranger to giving expert witness testimony in a court setting. At this stage in his career, he was performing over 100 postmortems a year and providing subsequent evidence in trials and inquests. The sworn evidence Dr. Harbison was about to give would be his post-mortem report on Father Niall. Mr. Groarke called Dr. John Frederick Austin Harbison to the stand. Mr. McEntee voiced no objection to Dr. Harbison being led through his report by the prosecution, and also suggested he may like to read his report for the court. Judge Rowe approved. Mr. Groarke asked Dr. Harbison to confirm he was the state pathologist and to list his qualifications and credentials. He then turned his examination of the witness to the details of his being notified of Father Niall's death and his subsequent arrival at Kilcorsey House. Dr. Harbison described what he saw when he entered the master bedroom and then proceeded to give a description of his initial examination of the body and the scene. He would detail the removal of Father Niall's remains to Tullamore Hospital and confirm which Gardaí were in attendance for the post-mortem. Dr. Harbison described starting the post-mortem by opening the plastic sheet the body was wrapped in and exposing different parts of the body. He would take trace evidence by scraping under the fingernails and by plucking and cutting samples of hair from the head. Mr. Groarke then asked Dr. Harbison about clothes and the personal effects found on the deceased. "Is it true, Dr. Harbison, you removed certain clothing from that body, which you gave to different members of the Gardaí?" "Now, nothing turns on that, Dr. Harbison. I think there was also some money in the trousers pocket of the deceased and some car keys." "Yes, my lord. We are not concerned with them. Did you note the external appearances of the body?" "Yes, my lord." Dr. Harbison continued, delivering his report on the external injuries he noted during the post-mortem. He would itemize every cut, bruise, graze, abrasion, and their measurements. He began by describing the facial injuries, including the most prominent deep cut on the lower left jaw. Dr. Harbison recited each injury on the rest of the body and legs, also detailing the graze, located an inch and a half below Father Niall's private parts. He described the small hemorrhages he found under the right lower eyelid, typical in asphyxial deaths. Also mentioned was Father Niall's nose was not broken, but that the cartilage in his nose was more mobile than normal. Dr. Harbison then moved on to the internal examination. Again, reciting from his report, he started by detailing the internal head injuries and his findings. He found multiple hemorrhages or bleeds in the head and brain. As the bleeding was freshly clotted, it indicated it was caused during Richard's assault, not from an older injury. He noted that the skull itself was intact, without any fractures. Dr. Harbison also detailed further areas of bleeding within the skull and flattening of the surface of the brain itself, suggesting pressure from swelling. On further dissection of the head and neck, he found bleeding in the facial tissue and around the left lower jaw, as well as around the right eye socket. Dr. Harbison confirmed that there were no fractures of the bones of the face. He dissected the airway and found white watery froth in the trachea, the larynx, and further down in the windpipe. He confirmed there was no evidence that Father Niall had vomited or inhaled any foreign object. When he got to the lungs, Dr. Harbison noted a significant find, stating, "The striking feature was that both lungs were grossly oedematous, which means they were very waterlogged. By this I mean, my lord, fluid which has derived from the circulation. I don't mean that water entered the airway. I use it as a simple term, the technical term being described as oedema. The right lung weighed 950 grams and the left 1,000. This would be 3 times the normal weight of the lung and would indicate that there would be very little space left for air absorption through those lungs." The oedema Dr. Harbison had described, coupled with the hemorrhages found under Father Niall's eyelids, indicate not only was he struggling to breathe and suffocating, but because he was also drowning as he died. Dr. Harbison then moved on to describe his findings from examination of the heart, testifying that the pericardium or sac around the heart was healthy. Externally, the heart was normal in size, and it showed 2 small white patches of fibrous tissue on its front surface. The heart weighed 400 grams, which I would put at the upper limit of normal for a man of almost 6 feet in height. The left ventricle, which is the main pumping chamber, showed slight hypertrophy or thickening of its wall, between 1.5 and 2 centimeters thick, the normal being said to be 1.3. On dissecting the heart, he found a small area of scar tissue measuring 1 centimeter across in the heart muscle, which he took a sample of for microscopic examination. Otherwise, the heart muscle appeared healthy. The coronary arteries did show traces of atheroma or narrowing, a normal degenerative heart disease found in older people. Despite this slight narrowing, Father Niall's arteries were open and would have allowed blood to circulate. He continued, giving evidence from his report, describing his findings from the remainder of the internal examination. Scar tissue was found in the abdomen from surgery in the past, and there was some inflammation of the lining of the stomach. The liver was slightly paler than normal, which is a sign of fat in it. A large quantity of tiny gallstones were found in the gallbladder. The spleen, pancreas, and adrenal glands were normal, but he noted an abnormal finding in the left kidney. Dr. Harbison told the court, "There was bleeding into the hilum, that is, the stalk of the left kidney, but the structure was not damaged. The kidney itself was intact." Mr. Groarke did not take the opportunity to ask Dr. Harbison to offer his opinion as to how this injury of the stalk of the kidney could have occurred. Dr. Harbison described taking blood and urine samples and then confirmed he concluded his examination of the body at 10 o'clock that evening. Mr. Groarke then asked Dr. Harbison to provide testimony as to his findings of the separate examination of the brain at a later date. Mr. Groarke continued, "On the 30th of July, then did you carry out an examination of the brain?" "Yes, my lord, I examined it, and in the presence of Dr. Farrell of the Richmond, who is a neuropathologist. It weighed 1,500 grams. Dr. Harbison concluded that the distribution of the bleeds on the brain were as a result of injury. He then went on to explain his findings from the microscopic examination of the samples taken at the post-mortem. "I then examined portions of the brain and the heart and other organs, my lord, under the microscope, and there were some changes indicative of lack of oxygen in portions of the brain, and also changes indicating fluid accumulation or cerebral edema in that brain." Dr. Harbison then provided a revelatory finding from his microscopic examination of the heart. He explained, "I examined the area of apparent scar tissue in the heart under the microscope and confirmed it, but could not find any evidence of recent muscle tissue death, that is, of a recent infarct or heart attack." He explained that at an examination of the kidney, it showed no evidence of blood pressure, which he described as important. This is an indication there could have been slight enlargement of the kidney. Again, Dr. Harbison was not asked how or why the kidney could have been enlarged. Dr. Harbison then went on to outline the blood alcohol level finding of 134 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood. He would claim, in his opinion, "I would not consider this a drunken blood level. For the benefit of the jury, the current limit permitted to a driver is 100. The deceased was 134, above the driving limit, but not very much above it." After outlining every injury and medical finding from his report, Dr. Harbison now reached his conclusions as to the manner and cause of death. "Father Niall Molloy, in my opinion, died of acute brain swelling, or the effects of acute brain swelling, and acute subdural hemorrhage, both resulting from multiple injuries to his head and neck, principally to his face. The distribution of those injuries is consistent with the deceased being the recipient of 5, 6, or more blows, such as by a fist, but the violence was insufficient to fracture any of his facial bones. Dr. Harbison's opinion as to the manner of death now posed a problem for Richard's defense team. The number of blows Dr. Harbison felt were necessary to cause the injuries nearly doubled the amount Richard claims he struck. Mr. McEntee would have to address this under cross-examination. Dr. Harbison continued, "Other pathological findings consisted of pulmonary edema. These were moist lungs with hemorrhage or bleeding into them, and a slightly enlarged heart. Usually, edema of the lungs is caused by one of 3 possibilities. Inhalation of vomit, which Dr. Harbison found no evidence of. Acute heart failure is another cause, but Dr. Harbison would explain that in Father Niall's case, this edema of the lungs, in my opinion, is most likely to have been associated with the head injury, a phenomenon which pathologists refer to as cerebral lung, which would have given rise to the froth seen excluding from the dead man's mouth and indeed in his windpipe." He then preferred his opinion on the evidence of heart failure being the cause of the edema as being certainly far less than the brain injury. I don't exclude, certainly, the heart condition as a possible contributory factor to that lung waterlogging. I mention this enlargement not so much of the heart as a whole, but of one chamber. The whole heart was within normal limits of weight. He then addressed the degree of heart disease Father Niall suffered from. Likewise, the degree of coronary artery disease in this man was not very great. I have seen considerably worse in people who have died of other causes. Dr. Harbison admitted that under the microscope he found an abnormal heart pattern of the heart muscle and slight thickening of the left ventricle or chamber. However, he went on to state that, despite the finding of these, my lord, nevertheless, my opinion is that the head injuries are still the primary cause of death and the dominant cause of the waterlogging of the lungs. Mr. Groark, in his examination, now wanted to delve further into the possible causes of the deep cut to Father Niall's left jaw. He asked, "Did you also consider, in relation particularly to injury number 5 being a laceration over the ramus or shaft of the lower jaw on the left side, a further possible cause?" "Yes, my lord, I was asked by the authorities to consider this. Could it have been caused by fist alone, or could it have been caused by some other agency? And certainly as a laceration, it is not common for a fist to split a jaw open as much as that in the general rough and tumble of cases that I see where there have been fisticuffs, though it would be possible with a particularly heavy blow. So that every other possible cause would be that something much harder than a fist struck the jaw, or, conversely, the jaw struck something fixed and hard. The simplest explanation of the latter being a fall against anything from the side of a table, a bedpost, a heating radiator, or something of that sort. One could not exclude the possibility of a kick causing it once the individual's head was near the floor. It is more the typical sort of injury that one would associate with either a kick or striking something hard than with just a simple blow of the fist." Mr. Groark continued, "You were about to say that you examined the body for evidence of any other injury." "Yes, I was interested in any evidence of a struggle, my lord, and did not find typical defensive injuries. These would be the sort of injuries that the dead man might have sustained in warding off blows. I did mention one forearm bruise, but as it had a fading appearance, it suggested to me that this was not associated with any struggle in the immediate hour or two before the man's death, and was possibly a day or two earlier. Likewise, I did not see any injuries sustained while giving punches. Those were my only observations on remaining injuries on the body. The next comment Dr. Harbison made referred to the injuries on Father Niall's legs. There are some on the leg, in common places of injury like the shin and the knee, that I did not attach any great weight to. The dismissive nature of this statement is quite baffling, especially as Dr. Harbison had just gone to the trouble of explaining that the bruise on Father Niall's arm was caused days before death. Yet he would brush over the injuries to the lower half of Father Niall's body. Dr. Harbison provided a time of death between late on the night of the 7th of July or the very early hours of the 8th of July, 1985. Dr. Harbison just provided a few alternatives as to how Father Niall could have been beaten to death, the possible manner of death. Now, Mr. Groarke concluded his examination of the witness by asking him to reaffirm his opinion as to the cause of death. He asked, "And I think you ended your report by saying the cause of death was acute brain swelling and acute subdural hemorrhage, and secondly, head injuries." "I consider these the underlying cause of death." "Yes, my lord." Mr. McEntee rose to his feet. In preparation for the trial, Richard's defense team would have pored over every word of the post-mortem report to identify any opportunity to cast doubt on scientific fact. Mr. McEntee had been waiting patiently for the right moment to begin his defense strategy. The cross-examination of Dr. Harbison would turn out to be one of the trial's defining moments and a significant turning point. The catalogue of injuries to Father Niall had to be explained to the jury somehow. Mr. McEntee had to deflect some of the blame for the injuries away from his respectable and reputable client. He suggested the possible scenario of Father Niall hitting his head off multiple pieces of furniture on the way down after being punched. This would become known in the media as the pinball theory. Mr. McEntee opened his questioning. "Dr. Harbison, the conclusion you reached, as I understand it, is that Father Malloy died as a result of probably blows which could have been as few as 5 in number." "Yes, my lord." "And of these, at least one, the one on the left jaw, that could have been caused when falling, if he fell heavily against an object on his way down." "Against a hard object, yes, my lord." "And similarly, Dr. Harbison, while it's not necessary for your conclusion, it is possible that more than one injury was caused by hitting something on the way down. It would be hit less hard or less directly than the one on the jaw, but could be explained in that way." "I think if there are multiple injuries in the course of a fall, my lord, one must postulate, if not a staircase, some step-by-step fall. That would be a little more difficult to presuppose in the room in which I saw the body, with its soft carpet. Well, take for instance, you have got the radiators, and you have got the bed, and you have got, say, from a radiator to a chair to the ground." "It is possible, my lord." "So that there is nothing in the evidence that precludes the possibility of our ending up with as few as 2 or 3 blows struck by Father Malloy's assailant and then further injury when he is on his way to the ground." "I think I estimated around the 5, my lord, so it postulates 3 on the way down and 2 from the assailant, or 3 from the assailant and 2 on the way down. So we can have as few as 2 or 3 blows, which is what my client says happened, That is consistent with your findings. Certainly the 3, my lord. 2, a little less likely. Well, Dr. Harbison, 3 is quite all right. Mr. Flynn says 2 or 3. That is consistent. Very good, my lord, yes. By having Dr. Harbison agree that the pinball theory was a possibility, Mr. McEntee had begun to erode the prosecution's case. In order to get a guilty verdict, the prosecution must prove their case beyond any reasonable doubt. Mr. McEntee then moved on to plant the next seed of doubt. Dr. Harbison, I know you favor the view Father Malloy died as a result of head injury. Yes, my lord. But I have to suggest to you, whilst I know you don't favor it, that you cannot dispose of the possibility that death was caused by acute heart failure not necessarily related to trauma. I could certainly say that a cardiac condition could have contributed to his death, my lord. I cannot ignore the brain injuries. I know you can't ignore the brain injury, and I'm not saying that they were not blows delivered to Father Malloy, but take the position where for some reason he lost his temper. He got very angry and became aggressive. He had a diseased heart, isn't that right? Not grossly diseased, but diseased. Right, my lord. Dr. Harbison, I have to suggest to you that there is a possibility that you cannot positively dispose of that death may have been consequent on acute heart failure that happened at the time or immediately before, but not consequent on the blows he got. At the time of, not immediately before, my lord. Well, immediately before, consequent on his rage or his anger and the efforts he made, because my instructions are, and the evidence is, that Father Malloy appears for some reason, or no reason perhaps, to have attacked my client. I am suggesting that rage or anger and the exertion consequent upon it attacking my client may have brought on acute heart failure, having regard to the morbid condition of Father Malloy's heart as a possibility, no more. Yes, my lord, I would accede to that possibility. Mr. McEntee had just made 2 contentious points and got Dr. Harbison to agree they were both possible. During the attack, due to his anger and rage, Father Niles suffered heart failure, and this was the cause of death. The pinball theory then took over to explain the other related injuries. There is a big difference between something being possible and something being probable. However, Mr. McEntee had planted the seed of doubt. Mr. Groark now had his work cut out for him as he took to his feet again to re-examine Dr. Harbison. He needed to dispel any doubts Mr. McEntee had just cast. When you say a possibility, Dr. Harbison, you said in answer to my friend initially that you cannot ignore the brain damage that you found. True, my lord. Is it still your view that the cause of death in this instance was primarily the result of head injuries sustained by the deceased? Yes, my lord. In your examination of the room, Dr. Harbison, did you find any object, insofar as you can recall, which was likely to? First of all, I think there is no evidence to suggest that there was a radiator in that particular room, but there is evidence of a radiator in the bathroom. Mr. McEntee took exception as to how this question was being put to the witness and raised an objection. This is cross-examining his own witness, my lord, and he is cross-examining in the most doubtful way. Mr. Groarke continued, Dr. Harbison, in your examination of the room, did you see anything which was likely to cause injury which you described to the jaw? Recalling the location of the blood smear on the floor pointing towards the bedpost would be near enough for a fall against it to have occurred, with the cut head then landing on the carpet, and the man was nearly 6 feet tall. It is stretching it a bit, because I seem to recall saying that the smear began 6 feet from the bed, a point approximately 6 feet from the foot of the double bed. So, in the position of the furniture at that time, that was the most likely. Judge Rowe offered one of the crime scene photographs to Dr. Harbison to help refresh his memory of the layout of the bedroom in Kilcorsi. He asked, Perhaps Dr. Harbison could look at the photographs. Have you got photograph 11, Doctor? Yes, my lord. That is after the body had been removed, and one can see the concentration of blood on the carpet. One can see the smear of blood extending towards the bottom left-hand corner of the photograph, and the photographer who took that picture would have been standing with the foot of the double bed close to his left hand. It doesn't actually show. One can see there are 2 chairs, for instance, but they are some distance from the bed in photograph 11. Justice Rowe continued, Have you finished, Mr. Groarke? Yes, my lord. Judge Rowe then turned to Mr. McEntee. Well, you can examine Dr. Harbison on the map, if you wish. I am obliged to your lordship. Do you see the map of the room, Dr. Harbison? Yes, I see it now, my lord. And the bloodstain that you talked about is there. Depending on where Father Malloy fell, possible candidates, I would suggest, are the bed pillar and the bedpost, because we know that there is, do we know that there is a pillar on the bed? I seem to recall that, yes, my lord, a spike sticking up. Can we posit, Dr. Harbison, that you hit your head off the spike that sticks up, then subsequently on the bed frame, and then on the floor, that the table with the television on it is a candidate, that the corner of the wardrobe is a candidate, the door of the wardrobe, and even, I suppose, if the row happened deeper into the room, possibly even the rocking chair. Any door furniture like those knobs we see on the photographs, they are all possible candidates, aren't they? Yes, my lord, I would say probably the small television table would have the sharpest edge. It is certainly in the area of the struggle, Dr. Harbison. But one still has to postulate 2 impacts, my lord. The bed, then, is probably the better candidate, isn't it, Dr. Harbison, with its great spiked knobs on it? Yes, my lord. And with that, Mr. McEntee concluded his examination, and the witness was excused. The next witness, Detective Garda Michael Keating, confirmed he was attached to the ballistics section of the Garda Technical Bureau in Dublin. He explained his duties also included technical examinations of crime scenes. He confirmed that on the 8th of July, 1985, he was accompanied to Kilcorsi House by Dr. Maureen Smith of the Forensic Science Laboratory, as well as previously mentioned Garda colleagues. He was shown upstairs to the master bedroom, where he saw the body of a man lying on his back just inside the door. Mr. Groarke began his questioning by asking Detective Keating if he saw something on the carpet. Detective Garda Keating replied, "Yes, my lord, I noted a number of items which were close to the body. There was a piece of cotton wool, a sock, a tissue, and a top and bottom of a clear plastic box. The top of it marked cotton. I would imagine it came from a cosmetic affair." "Nothing turns on it in any event, Detective Garda Keating?" "Nothing, my lord, no." "Did you see a mark on the carpet?" Yes, my lord. I saw a drag mark in what appeared to be blood from approximately 6 feet from the end of the bed towards where the body lay." "I think both ends of the mark were more heavily stained than the remainder, Detective Keating." That is correct, my lord, yes." "I think that you picked up certain items which would be taken by you in the normal way from the investigation of crime, but we are not concerned with those, Garda Keating. Did you, on the 9th of July, 1985, return to Kilcorsey House with other of the Gardaí?" "I did, my lord, yes." "Apart from the drag marks on the carpet in the upstairs bedroom, did you see other marks, Detective Keating?" "Yes, my lord. I continued my examination of the room on the 9th of July, and I saw, apart from the drag mark on the carpet, there were what appeared to be blood splatters and smears present on the following areas. On the edge of the door was smeared rather than splattered. The outside surface of the door and architrave leading to the closet, and the blood on architrave was smeared. The wall and picture frame to the right-hand side of the door to the closet, the left-hand architrave, which is fitted to the bedroom side of the door leading to the bathroom, this blood was smeared. On the radiator, wash hand basin and window ledge of the adjoining bathroom, there was blood on a magazine lying on the bed, on the top cover and duvet of the bed, on the bottom of the bedboard, on the television screen beside the bed, and on a magazine on top of the television." Detective Sergeant Keating confirmed each of these bloodstain locations were detailed on the map and in the photographs already entered into evidence. He advised that Dr. Smith took swabs from these bloodstain locations and that she would be providing evidence in relation to those results. Detective Sergeant Keating explained that his duties at the scene entailed taking swabs from any items or objects that had been stained, and he then packed and labeled them. This included the blood-stained bedding. He then confirmed handing over all the samples and bags of evidence to Dr. Smith. Mr. McEntee wanted to use the cross-examination of this witness to reinforce his pinball theory. He began his questioning. "Amongst the places that you found blood staining was on the bottom bedboard." "That is correct, my lord." "That is a board attached to the frame of the bed. Is that right, Detective Keating?" "Yes, my lord." "Correct me if I am wrong about this, but I think this is a rather large bed with 4 posts that came up and ended in some sort of ornamental device. Is that correct?" Yes, my lord. The bedboard was actually made of timber with 2 protrusions at both sides of the bed. 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, Detective Keating. Correct, my lord, yes. "And they ended in some sort of knob that isn't quite round, but an elongated knob. Is that right?" "If I remember properly, my lord, there were a number of different levels, but I know they were square." "They were square knobs, Detective Keating?" "Yes, my lord, if I remember rightly." "And they were sort of at the end of these posts that came up?" "Yes, my lord." And then there was a bedboard as well connecting them. Is that right? That is correct, my lord. A mahogany board connecting those, Detective Keating. Yes, my lord. So that one, I'm not asking you whether it happened, but it would be possible in falling to hit yourself off this square knob and then off the bedboard where you found the blood. A person could fall in that way. It is possible, my lord, yes. Mr. McEntee concluded his cross-examination. In 1986, forensics were nowhere near the level of sophistication they are today. The use of DNA in forensic science had not yet been discovered, so investigations were limited to only being able to identify different blood groups. However, blood splatters and their causes were well studied and understood. By examining the characteristics of a blood splatter, many things could be determined. The direction the blood traveled, the angle of the impact, the point of origin of the blood, and even the speed at which the blood was traveling. It is possible for forensic experts to be able to identify if a splatter was caused by a direct impact by a weapon, or if after the impact, the blood-stained weapon was then swung and the blood spun away from it. The prosecution did not take the opportunity to re-examine the witness to dispel the argument being formulated by the defense. Detective Sergeant Keating was then excused. The next witness for the prosecution was the aforementioned Dr. Maureen Smith of the Forensic Science Laboratory with the Department of Justice. Dr. Smith confirmed her occupation as forensic scientist and listed her qualifications for the court. Mr. McEntee indicated he had no objection to Mr. Groarke leading the witness through the exhibits of evidence she examined. Dr. Smith confirmed she attended Kilcorsie House on the 8th of July, 1985, with a number of Gardaí. At the scene, she took samples of what she deemed important to the investigation and also accepted samples and exhibits from the other Gardaí. Dr. Smith explained that she was provided with 3 blood samples, Richard's, Teresa's, and Father Niall's. She would then use these for comparison tests to determine who owned which blood and where it was found. As well as the samples and exhibits from the scene, Dr. Smith confirmed she also received the clothes Richard, Teresa, and Father Niall were wearing that night. She confirmed that Richard, Teresa, and Father Niall all had different blood groups, which she was able to identify. She proceeded to describe examining the bloodstains found on Richard's pajamas. There was confirmation of the presence of Father Niall's blood on the front of Richard's pajama top. Teresa's blood was found on the back of Richard's pajama top, and Richard's blood was found on his own pajama bottoms. Dr. Smith explained that she carried out a blood grouping on the bloodstains on Teresa's nightdress and dressing gown and found the blood belonged to Father Niall. She also confirmed that the blood on the orange towel was Father Niall's. Dr. Smith was then asked what she found on Father Niall's clothes. In exactly the same way, she grouped the bloodstains she found on Father Niall's jumper and trousers and determined it was his own blood. She confirmed finding a small bloodstain just above the right back pocket of Father Niall's trousers and that the stain matched Richard. Mr. Groarke then moved on to the other blood markings around the room. In relation to the blood that was found in the room, I think that you were not able to determine the groups of those stains which were found on the doors and walls. Isn't that right, Dr. Smith?
That is correct, my lord.
But you were able to group the bloodstains on the orange towel and the bedspread, the duvet cover and blouses from the end of the bed, and the magazine from the television set and the carpet.
Yes, my lord.
And who did that blood belong to?
With the exception of one stain on the duvet, all the blood stains were consistent with the blood of Niall Malloy. One stain on the duvet cover was consistent with the blood of Richard Flynn.
There was a small blood-stained area on the yellow towel from the bathroom, Doctor. I think you are satisfied that this was not from Niall Malloy, but could have come from either Richard or Teresa Flynn.
Yes, my lord.
And I think that you have those items of clothing here, if necessary, to be produced.
I returned them to the Gardaí, my lord.
Mr. Groarke concluded examining this expert witness, so Mr. McEntee began his cross-examination. Dr. Smith, what you found is consistent with the situation in which Father Malloy bled. We know that to be so.
Yes, my lord.
Mr. Flynn appears to have lost some blood as well, because you found some blood from him.
That is correct, my lord.
Mrs. Flynn didn't apparently lose any blood that you located, is that right?
No, my lord. There was a bloodstain on the left back of the pyjamas of Richard Flynn, and also on the orange blanket.
Mrs. Flynn lost some blood, and that is consistent with what we know, because she was struck, and Mrs. Flynn told us that she went to the assistance. She didn't tell us, but we know from evidence that she was with Father Malloy trying to resuscitate him when her daughter came on. So that explains that blood on her clothing. And apparently Mr. Flynn, in turn, tried to give assistance to both his wife and to Father Malloy. So that's all at peace with what you found, isn't that right?
Yes, my lord. I found an exchange of blood types on the different articles of clothing.
But consistent with the assistance that we know that Mrs. Flynn rendered to Father Malloy, and that my client rendered to Father Malloy, and to his wife at some stage.
Yes, my lord.
Nothing mysterious about that, Mr. McEntee concluded. Mr. Groarke addressed Judge Rowe. My lord, I would tender the remainder of the witnesses in the book of evidence to my friend, Mr. McEntee, but I understand that he will not require them. That being the case, my lord, that is the prosecution evidence. That was it. The prosecution's case rested, whereas Mr. McEntee had been building up to this moment all day. Mr. McEntee addressed Judge Rowe. I have an application to make, your lordship, which would be best made in the absence of the jury. Justice Rowe responded, Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, a matter has to be discussed in your absence. Would you retire to the jury room for a few minutes, please? The jury were escorted from the courtroom. The application Mr. McEntee was about to make is a common one, called noli prosequi. Before they begin calling their own witnesses, the defense will petition the judge to have the case thrown out, claiming the prosecution have not proven their case. Noli prosequi is only granted in exceptional cases. In most trials, the judge rejects the application and the case continues. Judge Rowe, however, was willing to hear what the defense had to say. The argument Mr. McEntee was about to make would be based only on the limited evidence heard up until this point in the trial. By making this application to the court at this juncture and waiving his right to call his witnesses, Mr. McEntee would ensure there could be no cross-examination by the prosecution. This was a deliberate tactic to prevent any witnesses for the defense from being asked to elaborate on their existing evidence. Mr. McEntee began by addressing the manslaughter charge. He argued that the cause of death was not beyond a reasonable doubt. He would use the fact that he got Dr. Harbison to accept a possibility as the backbone for his argument. Mr. McEntee stated, "The evidence of Dr. Harbison is that whilst he believes that the death of Father Malloy was caused by blows, he accepts that he cannot dispose of the possibility that Father Malloy died from acute heart failure before he was ever struck any blows." He then continued to argue that the onus was on the prosecution to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt that the death of Father Malloy resulted from the assault by Richard Flynn and not from any other cause. Mr. McEntee felt that the prosecution failed to prove their case because he got Dr. Harbison to accede to another possible cause of the injuries under cross-examination. He acknowledged that Dr. Harbison preferred a different explanation as to how the head injuries were caused. However, he reminded Justice Rowe that Dr. Harbison also accepted it was possible that Father Niall's death could have been due to him becoming angry, exerting himself with a diseased heart, which resulted in him suffering acute heart failure. Mr. McEntee pointed out that Dr. Harbison did not state what percentage the head injuries could have contributed to the cause of death. Because Dr. Harbison did not provide any ideas as to the extent the heart condition may have contributed to Father Niall's death, he suggested that the heart condition could have been the major contributing factor, and the punches may only have been the minor contributing factor. It is true, Dr. Harbison did not offer any opinion as to what percentage of contribution the head injuries or the heart condition may have played in Father Niall's death. He didn't attach any percentage to them because he was not asked to do so. Mr. McEntee continued, "In my submission, the position in respect to the evidence now is that your Lordship has evidence derived from the only two people present at the assault. Apart from the deceased, if there was an assault in the criminal sense at the incident, are Mr. Flynn and Mrs. Flynn. Mrs. Flynn is not a witness and cannot be a witness for the prosecution, my lord. So the only evidence of what happened on that occasion is derived exclusively from my client through the interview he had with the two police officers that your lordship has heard from, and the document that has gone in as a result of that, my lord. And there is no evidence, as there cannot be evidence, to contradict that." This was a nice segue into the self-defense aspect of the argument. Mr. McEntee then provided a scenario based on Richard Flynn's interview in the early hours with Sergeant Ford and Detective Inspector Monaghan. Because Richard declined every Garda request to make any additional statement, the first version he gave became the only explanation as to how and why Father Niall died. Mr. McEntee suggested that when Richard refused to get Father Niall and Teresa drinks, it triggered a violent reaction in them. They became indignant and attacked Richard. Father Niall was a much larger man than Richard and much fitter due to his outdoor pursuits. When Richard was attacked, he had no choice but to defend himself, which he was entitled to do. Instead of taking into consideration Dr. Harbison's opinion that the jaw injury in particular could have been caused by many means, selectively, Mr. McEntee would now offer up his pinball theory. For the purposes of this theory, Mr. McEntee chose to ignore Dr. Harbison's opinion that a kick to the face or a strike from a blunt instrument could equally be possible causes. The defense favored the notion that Father Niall possibly hit and bounced his head off various pieces of furniture while falling after being punched. Mr. McEntee wanted to reaffirm the point that his client should be acquitted, as the force used by him was reasonable for his own protection, therefore lawful. He did this by referring to numerous previous cases, but in particular a Supreme Court case, the People v. Dwyer, where self-defense was deemed lawful. This would ultimately lead on to the last piece of the defense's argument. Father Niall's death was also due to misadventure. Mr. McEntee continued, "Misadventure, my lord, a situation in where there was no intention ever to do any damage to Father Molloy, but what happened not because the human will or the human capacity for intending anything was at play, but because people were very tired, slightly drunk, and something totally irrational arose, and nobody intended the consequences that ensued, my lord." Mr. McEntee had laid out 4 main reasons as to why Justice Rowe should direct the jury to find Richard Flynn not guilty. Number 1, death was possibly from heart failure. 2, Father Niall's heart condition could have been a major contributory factor. 3, homicide is not unlawful if committed in self-defense. And lastly, the possibility of misadventure being due to drunkenness and exhaustion. As a result, an irrational situation arose, but Richard never intended to do harm, never mind to kill. Mr. McEntee concluded, "So, on those 4 grounds, I respectfully submit there is no case to go to the jury on the manslaughter charge, my lord." Next, Mr. McEntee had to get Justice Rowe to also dispense of the remaining lesser charge of assault causing actual bodily harm. To do this, he would refer back to the same Supreme Court case, the People v. Dwyer. Again, he used misadventure as a defense for Richard's violent assault on Father Niall. He pointed out that the prosecution would never be able to provide evidence to disprove Richard's belief that he meant no harm, that there was no intent or wish that Father Niall's death should have come about. Justice Rowe asked Mr. McEntee if the Dwyer case he was referring to expanded on the definition of misadventure. The People v. Dwyer dealt mainly with the question of self-defense. Mr. McEntee explained it didn't go into any further detail other than to define misadventure as a complete defense to homicide. He quoted the relevant section. "A homicide is not unlawful if it is committed in the execution or advancement of justice, or in reasonable self-defense of person or property, or in order to prevent the commission of an atrocious crime or by misadventure." Mr. McEntee followed this up by giving a recap of the close friendship of 28 years between Father Niall and the Flynns, including the events of the wedding weekend. He referred to the sudden attack on Richard by his wife and Father Niall as an aberration that occurred. Richard's response to being attacked was not intentional. Mr. McEntee argued, "This, my lord, in my respectful submission, is as near to an accident, a pure accident, a pure unintended occurrence as one could find, and again, my lord, if proof of that is needed further, my lord, you only have to look at the reaction of Mr. Flynn after the incident. He is immediately, my lord, without any regard to the consequences to him, he is first of all trying to revive the unfortunate Father Molloy, my lord. Then ringing the doctor, ringing the priest, getting his daughter to go for the doctor, eventually bringing the guards along to his house and telling them precisely what occurred, my lord. If ever there was a case redolent of total absence of intention to do any harm to anyone, It is in my respectful submission this one, my lord. This is a most sad, sad occurrence, my lord. But in my respectful submission, an occurrence which is not criminal in any meaningful sense of that word. Now, Mr. Groarke, on behalf of the state, would have the opportunity to counter and dispel each and every argument Mr. McEntee had just made in his application. He began by addressing the concept of misadventure being a possible defense by trying to explain its definition. Mr. Groarke told Justice Rowe, "My lord, misadventure implies precisely what it says, and that is an accident, an entire accident, my lord, in which no positive act containing any remote degree of malice could in any way be involved." To reinforce this, Mr. Groarke used two examples of what he believed were instances of death by misadventure. He stated, "For instance, my lord, where a person discharged a shotgun which he had absolutely no reason to believe was in any way loaded and killed someone, that would be misadventure. Or in the instance where a surgeon gives someone some type of treatment genuinely and innocently, believing that it is the appropriate and proper thing to do, but a death results. That too, my lord, is an instance of misadventure." Mr. Groarke continued to argue that for there to be misadventure, there cannot be any degree of malice involved. He stated that it should be up to the jury, based on what they've heard, to ultimately decide if there was evidence of malice. He also argued that there was sufficient evidence for the jury to also decide whether Richard Flynn acted in self-defense. In this instance, Mr. Groarke felt that self-defense should only be justified if Richard had a genuine reason to believe that his life was being threatened and the force used by him was reasonable for the situation. Mr. Groarke also quoted from the People v. Dwyer case to help reinforce his point. He stated, "If, however, the prosecution at the same time does establish that the force used was more than was necessary, it has been established that the killing was unlawful as being without justification and not having been by misadventure. In those circumstances, the accused in such a case would be guilty of manslaughter." Mr. Groarke then went further. He respectfully asked Justice Rowe to allow the jury to make up their minds from all the facts and circumstances as to whether Richard thought the threat he was under justified the level of force he used. According to Mr. Groarke, this wasn't a case of a stranger having an altercation with another stranger. These were good friends of 28 years who set upon each other for no good reason, according to Richard. He felt the jury should also be allowed to decide if Richard used reasonable force when he inflicted all the injuries to Father Nile. Mr. Groarke reminded Justice Rowe that not only were there multiple and severe injuries to Father Nile, but by Richard's own admission, they were not caused by an implement or weapon. They were caused by a man's fist. He then surmised that it would take a vast amount of force to cause subdural bleeding and brain damage with just a fist. Plus, he reminded the judge that Father Nile had no offensive or defensive marks on his body. So, Mr. Groarke reiterated that it should be up to the jury to decide if Richard acted in self-defense and with a reasonable level of force. Having satisfied himself that he had argued sufficiently on this point, Mr. Groarke then moved on to dispel the suggestion that heart failure prior to the assault played a part in Father Nile's death. Dr. Harbison conceded there was a possibility that heart failure may have contributed to Father Niall's death in some way. Mr. Groarke also conceded to this. However, he explained that Dr. Harbison stuck to his guns about the head injuries being the primary cause. Mr. Groarke then explained that Dr. Harbison was satisfied with his opinion that the cause of death was the head injuries, in particular the subdural bleeding. He reminded the court that during his evidence and cross-examination, Dr. Harbison stressed that he would not ignore the head injuries being the main cause of Father Niall's death. As with his previous points, Mr. Groarke appealed to Justice Rowe to again allow the jury to decide whether to accept Dr. Harbison's evidence and the cause of death being due to the head injuries. The onus is on the prosecution to present and prove its case against the accused. Mr. Groarke was satisfied he had proven the state's case, but he felt strongly it should ultimately be up to the jury to decide if he had done the duty of the prosecution. Father Niall's family, friends and supporters who travelled to Dublin to sit in the gallery kept looking at each other in total disbelief. During lulls in the proceedings, there were quiet murmurs and furrowed brows as they tried to take in what was happening. The jury were still absent from the courtroom when Justice Rowe began to speak. "I have no hesitation in granting the direction sought by Mr. McEntee on the manslaughter charge. I am satisfied that on Dr. Harbison's evidence, it would not be open to the jury to convict of manslaughter." Justice Rowe agreed that the defence clearly established the reasonable possibility that self-defence was necessary. William Molloy had remained stoic throughout the day, but now he could feel his blood boiling. Justice Rowe accepted the pinball theory and used it to warrant his decision to dismiss the manslaughter charge. He felt if Richard had definitely struck all 5 or 6 blows, he would have allowed the jury to make the decision. But because Dr. Harbison agreed it was possible Richard only struck 2 to 3 blows, the other 2 to 3 blows could have been caused by Father Niall hitting something on the way down. He then asked Mr. Groarke to elaborate as to why the remaining charge, assault occasioning actual bodily harm, should be decided by the jury. Mr. Groarke now desperately tried to argue that only one of the injuries, number 5 to the lower jaw, could have been caused by Father Niall falling and hitting something. He reminded the court that Dr. Harbison had opinioned that the injury could equally have been caused by being struck with a blunt instrument or from a kick, as well as from a fall against a fixed object. He again stressed that the jury should be allowed to decide if the injuries Father Niall sustained were justifiable, or if they constituted an assault with the use of unnecessary force. Justice Rowe now turned to Mr. McEntee and gave him another opportunity to offer his opinion on Mr. Groarke's argument. Mr. McEntee rose and simply reminded the court that Dr. Harbison admitted it was possible Richard delivered 2 punches and 3 further injuries were sustained on the way down. Also possible, according to Mr. McEntee, Richard delivered 3 punches and 2 further injuries were sustained on the way down. All in all, the evidence pointed to 2 or 3 punches being struck, and this matched his client's account. Justice Rowe then advised that he was of the opinion that Mr. McEntee was right. Justice Rowe then announced, "I must give a direction on the second count as well." He decided to also direct the jury on the assault charge because he felt the prosecution could not prove that more force than was necessary was actually used. Justice Frank Rowe had just decided that he was not going to permit the jury to hear any more evidence in the case, or indeed allow them to deliberate to reach a verdict. Instead, he was about to direct them to find Richard Flynn not guilty on both counts. Mr. McEntee began to ask Justice Rowe a question. "May it please your lordship," but before he could ask anything, Justice Rowe interjected. "I think I should say that since the case aroused so much publicity and so much unpleasant speculation, that there is not the slightest evidence whatever of any impropriety on the part of Father Molloy and Mrs. Flynn. None whatever. That has been completely excluded." Justice Rowe then called the jury back into the courtroom to give them their direction and explain his reasons behind it. "Ladies and gentlemen, the case has come to an end in your absence. Mr. McEntee applied for a direction on both counts, and having heard him and Mr. Groark, I was of the opinion that Mr. McEntee's application was well-founded, and accordingly I am directing you to bring in a verdict of not guilty on both counts. I should explain to you why I have arrived at that decision. In a criminal case like this, the state must prove beyond reasonable doubt that an accused person is guilty on every count that they prefer against him. That means, in this case, the state must prove that Mr. Flynn was guilty of manslaughter on the first count, guilty of assault occasioning actual bodily harm on the second count. They must prove that beyond all reasonable doubt. The law puts no onus on Mr. Flynn to prove that he is innocent. In this very sad case, and that's what it is from start to finish, a row between people who were close friends for 30 years, in this case, there is no evidence as to what happened except the statement made by Mr. Flynn. And on his own statement, it would not be proper to convict him on either count. The only other evidence on which the state could rely as being useful to their case is the evidence of Dr. Harbison. But Dr. Harbison agreed that there was a possibility that Father Molloy died from a heart attack. And once that possibility is there, the law does not allow you to speculate and to say that he died as a result of head injuries caused by an assault. On the second count, Dr. Harbison's evidence makes it impossible for you properly to convict or for me to leave the case to you, because he agrees that only 2 blows, perhaps 3, may have been struck, that other injuries were caused when Father Molloy fell. If that is the case assumes a very different aspect than what it had when it was opened. The possibility of self-defense is undoubtedly brought into the picture by the evidence, and if only 2 or 3 blows were struck, it would be impossible to say that more force was used than was necessary. So, for these reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I have had no hesitation in the end in acceding to Mr. McEntee's application and directing you to return a verdict of not guilty. Justice Rowe then turned to address the gallery. I think, since it is such an exceptional case, that I am justified in offering my sincere sympathy to all concerned in what was a great tragedy, particularly Father Molloy's family, who have suffered the sad loneliness caused by his death, and of course have also had to suffer from unpleasant talk because the incident happened in Mr. and Mrs. Flynn's bedroom. It is perfectly clear from all the evidence that the friendship between Father Molloy and Mrs. Flynn was a perfectly proper one. So proper that he was in Mr. and Mrs. Flynn's bedroom. They were great friends for nearly 30 years, and there is not an iota of evidence that there was anything improper in their relationship. In fairness to Father Molloy's family and his close relatives, I think I should state that neither is there anything which suggests that Father Molloy was guilty of any improper conduct. Mr. Flynn's defence raises the possibility that a blow was struck, but the best of friends fall out at times. These were very close friends. They all had probably a little more drink than they would normally take because of Mr. Flynn's daughter's wedding. One word borrowed another. This is not the first time that friends have struck each other blows, but in this case, all parties were very unlucky in that the blows led to death. I have not the slightest doubt that Mr. Flynn had not the remotest intention of killing Father Molloy, or indeed of causing him any harm whatever, and as far as Mr. Flynn is concerned, he must have suffered appalling mental agony since this unfortunate matter. It will live with him for the rest of his life. For these reasons, I think, whilst it is a little bit unusual, it is not improper for me to express sympathy with all parties over this dreadful matter. Nobody intended anything wrong to happen, any injury to be caused. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
In less than 4.5 hours, it was all over. Richard Flynn was found not guilty on both counts and was now free to leave the court, to go home to Kilcorsie and to get on with his life. Richard and his daughter Maureen hastily made for their car down a back street behind the Circuit Criminal Court while being pursued by a throng of journalists and cameras. Richard would make no comment. However, when asked by the media how they felt, Maureen offered, "We are very happy." The law, as it stood in Ireland in 1986, did not allow the DPP to appeal to the Supreme Court a direction by a judge to acquit. Richard Flynn had been acquitted. He could never be tried for Father Niall's murder again. As far as the Molloy family was concerned, Judge Rowe's parting remarks had delivered nothing but insult upon insult. William was shaking and white with rage as he left the court and was immediately swarmed by journalists asking for his reaction to air on the news later that evening. When asked how he felt, he would use only one word: sickened. William, having previously lived in America for many years, told the media that he felt like leaving Ireland and moving back to the US. So many questions were left unanswered as far as the Molloy family were concerned, the main one being how could this outcome be possible, especially when so much of the evidence hadn't even been presented. He felt he had just witnessed a whitewash, and William could barely contain his anger and devastation. In just over 4 hours, Richard Flynn's highly anticipated trial reached a dramatic conclusion. Despite medical evidence revealing Father Niall suffered a far more violent beating than initially believed, Richard Flynn was acquitted and walked free. In episode 4, reeling from the trial's outcome, the Molloy family steel their resolve as they prepare for the coroner's inquest into Father Niall's death. While hopes run high that the inquest will finally uncover the truth, it ultimately leaves behind more questions than answers. This series was written, produced and edited by Liv Kerwin. Narrated by Marcus Kerwin. Music, Take Up Your Cross by Onchenko Music. We would like to extend our very special thanks to Mr. Bill Maher and Father Niall's family. This series is dedicated to the memory of Joe, Matthew and Tony. This has been a Kurska production.